To can ground beef, you just take your raw beef, put it in a pot, turn your heat on, and you just cook it in some water until it is all done. In this pot, I have almost 11 pounds. I say almost 11 pounds because one package was, I guess, the end of our beef that we bought. So I might have 10.5 pounds in here. I have my pressure canner ready. Over here, I have some pint jars ready to go. In each pint jar, I have a half a teaspoon of salt. You can use wide mouth jars or regular mouth jars. You can use pints or quarts or even half pints. Just want to make sure that your space you're working on is thoroughly clean. On average, you can get about 1 pound of ground beef per pint jar, 2 pounds of ground beef for a quart. Aside from the salt, if you want to add other spices to flavor your ground beef with, you can. You could do taco seasoning, whatever you would like. But by just strictly having salt, or you don't even have to have salt, salt is optional, but by just having salt, your jars of ground beef can be much more versatile and be used for anything. However, just know that there are some herbs when pressure canned, the flavor intensifies or becomes bitter. So make sure that you decide what you're wanting to use and kind of look into what kind of flavor that's going to impart on your meat. I know sage, I haven't done this myself, but I have heard that sage, once it's pressure canned, it becomes really bitter. So just to, keep that in mind. I'm not going to go into all the details on canning today in this video. Be sure to check out my canning playlist linked below. I have all sorts of videos, not just on how to can certain things, but also on what I do to prepare for canning, what a rolling boil is, fingertip tight, debubbling, all sorts of things. Some questions answered and updates to how to use home canned food and whatnot. So what I'm doing is just every now and then I just go through this pot here with this long handled wooden spoon and just try to chop up this meat into smaller pieces so it'll go ahead and brown and cook faster. But while I'm waiting for the beef to be done, I want to go ahead and comment on something. Some people, when they pressure can ground beef, they will strain off all of this water, this meat broth, this little bit of fat that we have and whatnot. They'll strain all this off and then they'll add fresh hot water to their jars. But I want to show you what my canning book says. So my canner here, this is an all-American canner. It's a 930, a model 930, and here's the book that it came with. On page 32 up here, after you cook the meat, it says to remove the excess fat, fill the hot jars with the pieces, and then add boiling meat broth. You can also add tomato juice or water, but boiling meat broth. And that's what this in this pot is going to be. It's going to be our boiling meat broth. Now, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to add clean boiled fresh water to my meat because there's all kinds of really good tasty stuff in this broth here. I don't want to lose that. So I'm going to be using this liquid to fill my jars. Now I do want to touch on the part where it said to remove excess fat. This is our beef. This is a whole beef that we just got a couple days ago. Each year we make a big beef purchase. Our beef that we get, it's raised locally, it's grass-fed, grass-finished, free-range, pasture-raised. It is a really good, wholesome beef. And because it is grass-fed 100% and grass-finished, it is not very fatty. Ever since we've been getting beef from this particular farmer, there's not a whole lot of fat. Okay, I mean, it still tastes good, it's so tender, but there's just not a ton of fat like you would see in Walmart's junk beef, like 80-20. By the time you cook that down, you'll have so much less meat than you would of what you actually bought because of all the fat, because they're grain-fed. They are grain-fed, grain-finished to fatten them up. But this is not very fatty at all. So I'm not going to worry about skimming off the fat. All right, our meat is ready to go. It is all cooked and it's broken up. I finished breaking up the meat with this thing right here. I don't really know what the technical name is of it, just a meat smasher thing. Now, in my canner here, I have 3 inches of water. Now, this is my All-American canner, model 930, and the book says I can use 2 to 3 inches of water. I usually choose to use 3 inches of water, no less than 2.5 inches of water. And from the very first time I got this canner, I measured it out, and a half a gallon gives me 1 inch of water. So 3 half gallons or 1.5 gallons gives me 3 inches of water. Before we go ahead and fill up our jars, I do want to tell you about this particular jar. You can see it has the embossed size here on it, and over here as well, like the measurements, the cups and ounces. However, I am testing this jar out. This is the only jar from this brand that I will be using today in the pressure canner. And the reason is this jar is from Walmart, and it is their Mainstays brand, and it says it's for water bath canning and pressure canning. However, I'm a little cautious of using it because I do not know if it's a tried and true canning jar or not. I mean, chances are, Ball or Kerr actually makes it. It's possible. I know they make Golden Harvest brand, so they might make this one too, but I could not find any information on the box saying so. So I am going to test this jar in my pressure canner to see if it holds up. Hopefully it will not break. So we'll see. If it does hold up, then that will be really good to know because these Mainstays jars are, I think, about $4 or $5 cheaper a case for the pints than the Ball jars. So if they hold up, that'll be a good savings. All right, so now what we're going to do, going to get it close so we don't make such a big mess. And I have this long-handled thing here. I got it for skimming off curds. Like, it's probably a little bit too big for my slotted spoon that I used to use. It broke, so I need to get another one. So for right now, I'm using this, and I'm afraid it's going to make a mess. Okay. I will need 2 hands to do this so I don't make a mess. But what we're going to do is we're going to fill the beef up to 1 inch of headspace, which is the bottom of this ring right here. And then we will use my ladle and we will fill also up to the 1 inch of headspace of the beef broth there. Much easier when you can use 2 hands. So we have the jar filled with ground beef to 1 inch of headspace. Now let's go ahead and add our liquid on it. And I always like to just kind of mix the liquid if there's any fat in it, like when I'm canning broth, just to, mix the fat in so I'm not scooping fat only. The reason that you want to cook your beef is because if you do it raw, if you can beef raw, then when you go to take it out, it'll be like a solid mass, a solid clump of the canned beef. Okay, now we just want to remove any air bubbles. And when you remove the air bubbles, what usually happens is it'll lower the liquid content. So you need to remeasure it again and then add any more liquid. And you want to do it to 1 inch of headspace. Right up there is just fine. Now what we're going to do, because there's some fat in here, we just take our damp rag that was dipped in white vinegar and we're going to wipe off the fat, if any happen to get on the rim of the mouth. Okay, we're just going to clean that off, make sure there's no fat, no salt, no beef, nothing that would inhibit a proper and strong, firm seal. Now we're going to put our canning lid on. Used to, these lids had to be heated very warm to help soften the little rubber gasket seal, to make it seal better. but they no longer have to be, and it saves time by not having to do that. So you put the lid on, and then you put the band on or ring fingertip tight, and I cannot do it while holding the camera. Okay, so fingertip tight is when you turn the band or the ring until you meet resistance, then you just go a little bit farther. And fingertip, it's called fingertip because you just tighten it with the tips of your fingers. You don't crank down and use your arm muscle or wrist muscle. Okay, but if you want to see a better demonstration of fingertip tight, that video is in the canning playlist. Now this is ready to go in the pressure canner. And because the beef and the broth was really hot already, the water in the pressure canner has already been warming up. It is not hot, but it is warm. All right, and here is another one. Now, in case you're wondering what these two lines are and what they mean, I reuse my canning lids, whether water bath canning or pressure canning. I always have. And again, in my canning playlist, I have a video where I show what I look for and kind of tell you why I do that. All right, let me go ahead and talk about a stove or a range for just a second. If you have one of those smooth top or glass top stoves and you go to pressure can or use cast iron, you'll want to check with your manufacturer on whether or not the stove is built to withstand that. Now, several years ago, I had a glass smooth top. I don't know if it was an induction or not, but it was one of those glass smooth top stoves. I had it from 2006 until 2012 when we sold that house. So for 6 years, I did can on that smooth top, glass top stove, and I also did use cast iron on it as well, because cast iron's all that I use when it comes to skillets. Anyhow, however, and I never ever had a problem whatsoever, and I did it and didn't even know I wasn't supposed to, okay? But since then, I have learned that that some people have issues with it. So always check with the manufacturer of your stove to make sure if it can withstand it or not. But I will say my pressure canner I had at that time was not a double stack. It was my single stack Maid of Honor pressure canner, which I still have. It was my grandma's. All right, you guys are propped up on my daughter's espresso maker. So I just lift the jar up and over the pot of beef. That way I'm not making a mess and splashing anything out of the pot. And I do lightly pack the meat in there. Of course, I don't press down full force, but I do kind of lightly pack it in there just like that. And again, I stir the liquid in the pot so I'm not getting all just fat. And then just move that meat around to get out any of the air pockets. Then measure your headspace again. Then again, take your rag that's been dipped in, your clean rag, that has been dipped in white vinegar, wipe off, and wipe off the mouth of the jar. And put your canning lid on fingertip tight and put it back and put it in the canner. I have the bottom full of my jars, so I'm going to add this rack here on top. And when you add the rack on top, you want to make sure that all the jars are under the walls of the rack, okay? So you want this sitting flat. We got 12 pints of ground beef in the canner and it is loaded. Now we're going to go ahead and get this lid on. Now again, I'm holding the camera, aka the phone, with my left hand, so you'll just have to try to follow my direction. On the rim of this lid, the part that goes inside of the canner, on the rim of this lid, you'll want to coat it with a very, very thin layer of olive oil every now and then. I do this maybe once every half dozen times I can. The reason you do that is because this canner does not come with a rubber gasket. So if you do not take the lid off after canning within a certain period of time, the lid, they say it can be very difficult to get off. So the olive oil just acts as a lubricant. Oh, something else you want to check is you see this vent pipe right here. So what you do before you can, you hold that vent pipe up to light. You find a thing. And you want, see that light through it? You want to be able to you want to make sure that you can see light through that vent pipe. That just makes sure that there's no food particles or anything trapped and clogging up the vent pipe. So there's an arrow here, a groove here. You just want to line this up and make sure this little hook is here. And then you take opposite sides of these clamps and you tighten them both down at the same time. And then you just keep doing that all around, which again, I need 2 hands. Okay, so we have this all clamped down. We do not have our weighted gauge on the vent pipe. Here's the weighted gauge. So I am less than 1,000 foot in elevation, so I will put this on the 10 pounds, but not right now. So you'll just need to look up your elevation. You may need 15 pounds or 5 pounds. And if you are going by the dial gauge, then you'll want this needle to go up to 11 pounds of pressure. We have our heat on. We're going to let this build up, and whenever steam comes up, we want a steady stream of steam. And again, I have a video on my canning playlist talking about this, but we want a steady stream of steam for 10 minutes, okay? After 10 minutes, then we will put on the weighted gauge, the jiggler, and then once it starts jiggling, so for my 10 pounds of pressure, I want 1 to 4 jiggles every minute. Or again, if you're going by the dial gauge, you want it to be 11 pounds of pressure. But once it has its first jiggle, you know it has reached the pressure mark for whatever you have it set for, and that is when you will start your timer. So for these pints of ground beef, it needs to process for 75 minutes. If you put these in half pints, they also need to process for 75 minutes. If you put them in quarts, they need to process for 90 minutes. All right. So you can consult your canning book on all the details on how to use the canner. That's all I'm going to go into on canning this. This process, everything that you saw, you can use the same process for ground pork, ground deer, which is venison, ground bear, ground elk, ground moose, things like that. See, here the dial gauge is 11. And the jiggler just jiggles every now and then. All right, the 75-minute timer went off. So we're going to turn the burner completely off. And we're going to wait for this dial gauge to go all the way to 0 and for this to stop jiggling before we remove the jiggler. Okay, the dial gauge, the pressure canner has dropped to 0, 100% on its own. Now we can take off this jiggler. You can see it is not making any noise. And now we're going to wait about 5 minutes before we remove the lid. Okay, so I've been taking these out, and you want to take them out level. Now to get this hot rack out, I just use a long fork and angle it in there. Okay, and we're just going to let these sit here and completely cool for about 12 to 24 hours, and then we'll test our seals and I also have a video showing that. It is normal for them to still be bubbling and boiling like this. It's perfectly fine. It's also really nice to know that the Mainstays brand of canning jars from Walmart for pressure canning, they held up. So none of these boiled over out of the jar into the canner. They all did perfectly fine. And you saw that I just added the beef broth liquid that the meat was cooking in. So let's see what the liquid inside the canner looks like. It is clear. Here's the dozen pint jars of our canned ground beef. They all sealed. You can see they all look nice. Again, I actually ended up having 2 jars of the Mainstays brand, and neither jar broke. They both withstood pressure canning, so that was great. But you can see, even though I did not skim off the fat, it did well. There wasn't too much fat. Of course, some has more than others, but it all worked out well. None of them overflowed. None of them seeped out. I didn't even have any grease. When I cleaned them off, there wasn't even any fat or oily grease around the outside. They just look really nice. And you can see my lids that I reused. This lid has been reused 3 times. These have been reused twice. You can see they sealed. And again, you can look at my video on how to test for seals, and also on things I look for whenever I go to use my home canned food. Well, thank you for watching.